I guess I'd been involved with harm reduction activities long before I even heard the term, and it was to do with my past as a drug user, injecting drug user, and someone living with hepatitis C, and that's what's brought me to harm reduction, is this sort of marrying of my past then and my life now. So I guess when I was about 18, I was a really heavy pot smoker, and then I got involved with the Aotearoa legalised cannabis party. So I'd stand on the street and try and get people to vote for us and talk about the importance of decriminalising a substance which was essentially what I felt to be a health-giving substance. Smoking pot and using other drugs were victimless crimes in my opinion, and for them to be illegal was an anathema to me. I couldn't understand it. It just seemed to create much more harm than it solved. So I was involved in that, and then I started to get into heroin, and I sort of got into it in every single way. I was really into the whole history of opiate use. I'd go and get books out of the library and read about when it was legal. I started growing opium poppies in New Zealand, so I was using in New Zealand, and having an opiate dependency is actually a lot harder than it is here. The drugs are harder to find, they're much more expensive, it's a smaller place, so you come to the attention of the police a lot quicker, and I did pretty quickly as well. I didn't try and hide my drug use. I was really skinny, I looked like a typical drug user, I had a mohawk, and I remember being followed around in shops and pharmacies by staff thinking I was going to steal stuff. So I was well aware of the stigma that was attached to being a drug user. And I worked at a peer-run needle exchange during this time, just as a volunteer. And it was there that I learnt a bit more about hepatitis C, HIV, the importance of needle and syringe provision, which was obvious to me, right? I needed them. At that time I was using every day, and I used heroin every day for about 8 years. And that was a battle, I used heroin for about 6 months daily before I really had a habit. And that day was life-changing for me. I remember waking up in the morning and I was sick, I was spewing, I was shaking, my muscles were spasming. And from that moment on, I felt like my life was no longer completely my own, and that I had to have heroin every day just in order to feel well, just in order to function. And I hated that. I liked feeling in control of the drugs, not the drugs being in control of me. And the fact that what I was doing in order to make myself well was illegal just created a whole heap of problems. I had to make money to get the drugs, I couldn't really do anything else. That was my day, my life, and I had constant battles of trying to stop, but I could never get past 3 days cold turkey, and I'd be crawling around the floor going, oh, just give me something. and I resisted going on the methadone for years because for a lot of users in New Zealand it was seen to have sold out. You go on the methadone, it's this horrible substance, you're not getting high as much, and you're bound to the restrictions of the clinic. But in the end I went on the methadone, things were getting really bad for me and I wasn't coping very well, so the methadone helped. But I wasn't ready to stop injecting, and I remember me and my partner, we'd go to our chemist, get the methadone. We were on supervised consumption. So I had 1 day a week pick up on a Sunday, but every other day, if we could, we would go in and we'd try and hold the methadone in our mouths, and when we'd get out of the chemist, we'd spit it out into the same container, then we'd drive off to a park and we had a little Bunsen burner and we'd cook down the done and filter it and share it and inject it. So, at that time I didn't have Hep C. My partner had Hep C, most of the people I knew had Hep C, and I was quite careful not to get it. I didn't share, but I did do things like that. Right? My partner could have had bleeding gums. I was spitting methadone into a container, basically hitting up his spit outs as well. And so, in a way, the restrictions of the clinic were producing harm because, I was on supervised consumption, yet I wasn't ready to stop injecting. And it got worse. I got found out, I got caught, I got called up and sent to the naughty chemist which was open on Sundays as well. So I had my 1 day a week takeaway cut, and I was under really strict supervision where you had to open your mouth and show that you'd swallowed it. I was absolutely devastated. I remember crumpling to the floor in a heap when I found out, you know, my sort of one outlet, being able to have my hit of methadone, at least one guaranteed hit a week, had been taken away from me. And so what happened, you know, I didn't want to stop injecting. I wasn't ready to stop injecting. Methadone provides a blocker. Heroin isn't going to do much good. So my use of what we called in New Zealand poor man's speed, or Ritalin, increased. And over there, because our access to drugs is somewhat limited, Ritalin hit off big time. It didn't have great effects. People get paranoid, and it's a bit like Coke. You're just hitting it up and over and over and over again. So I was completely obsessed with Ritalin. I was on the methadone, and I was injecting 20 times a day if I could. And the methadone clinic found out about this, and they called me in and they said, if you don't stop using Ritalin, we're going to cut you off the methadone because we think you're going to die. And basically what they said is, we think you're going to die and we don't want you to die in our books. So if you're going to die, go and die somewhere else, right? They didn't offer me any sort of help. They didn't offer me to put me in a hospital or residential care. I didn't even know about rehabs or anything. And also around that time I thought, well, I might as well bring myself off the methadone anyway, because I thought that I was probably going to end up in jail pretty soon. And in New Zealand there's no methadone provision in jails, so the last thing I wanted was to end up in jail with a methadone habit and have to go cold turkey. So I started bringing myself down off the dome. So in those ways, you know, you can see how harm reduction was acting and not acting in my life. You know, I'd had access to clean needles and syringes. When I was working at the needle exchange, I ended up getting fired from this peer-run needle exchange for being too messy, which was a bit of an accomplishment really, because it was a pretty laid-back needle exchange. And I remember in the weekends, you'd walk up the steps and billows of pot smoke would be coming down to meet you, you know, and everyone was a user, but I managed to get fired. So that was something. But yeah, so I mean, the one thing that I guess the harm reduction initiative that could have been helping me, methadone, was in a way producing more harms because it, you know, the supervised consumption meant that I was still injecting and I was trying to divert unsuccessfully. And also, you know, I mean, I guess like a lot of drug users, I felt like I was fundamentally a good person, but the things I was doing in order to keep myself well landed me in constant danger of being incarcerated. I wasn't stealing or anything like that. I was generally selling drugs to friends and things like that just to keep my habit going. And you know, at times I knew I was under police surveillance, but I didn't stop because I had to just keep on going. So what ended up happening is I did end up in prison, and my lawyer told me I was facing a 13-year jail sentence, and things were not going well for me. You know, I'd had a couple of overdoses, been abducted by a gang member, had some really horrible situations, and I was incredibly scared of going to jail. The thought of going to jail for 13 years, I was just so scared. And I was lucky, I managed to get bail, and a friend told me that if I went to rehab it would help my chances of when I came up for trial. So I went to rehab, and I really hated it. I absolutely hated it. And you know, I'd been trying to give up drugs for the last 10 years. I've been trying to get on top of my habit for the last 10 years. But once I was in rehab, all I could think about was the drugs. I fantasized about them, and I grieved them as well. But in doing that, it helped me to stop using. And if it wasn't for the jail sentence, I wouldn't have stayed because I was so scared of going to jail, but I also desired the drugs so much. So, you know, at that time, having Hep C came to the fore for me. I didn't mention that before, when I was using, just about when I was using Ritalin on the methadone, I got a Hep C diagnosis. And I wasn't surprised because my partner had it. I wasn't happy because I've been trying not to get it. But I was nowhere near as devastated as I was when I found out I lost my methadone takeaways. You know, for me, that was the ultimate, you know, that was the devastation. Hepatitis C, yeah, well, it was bound to happen, right? So I was in rehab and I was going to the doctor, and the doctor was saying, look, your ALT levels, your liver function levels are really high. Mine were about 480 and the normal was below 40. So she was worried and she was saying, you have to go on treatment. And I was like, oh God. And so after rehab, I moved into my first house with non-using people. And it was strange. I was sort of watching them, watching how they lived. And I didn't want to tell them I had Hep C because I didn't want them to judge me. And at the same time, I was still going to the doctor and getting tests, and they were saying you should do treatment. And I was really scared of treatment. You know, I didn't want to be injecting myself. So, you know, I'd had a love affair with injecting for the last decade. I didn't want to be using a syringe again to inject myself, which might actually make me feel really horrible, like heroin withdrawals. You know, I was scared it was a recipe for relapse. And also, you know, how would my flatmates cope? Well, you know, they'd guess, right? I would be looking sick, I'd have to keep the interferon in the fridge. So I had all these dilemmas. So that's what led me to doing some research on this. When I stopped using, I went back to university. I started my degree, but I dropped out when I got my heroin habit. And so I went back to university, I finished my Bachelor of Arts, and then I could do my Masters. So I interviewed people living with hepatitis C about all those issues, about, you know, disclosure, discrimination, treatment, and things like that. And that led on to me getting my PhD, getting a scholarship to do my PhD in Sydney at the National Institute for HIV Social Research. And I did the same thing. I kept on interviewing people with hepatitis C, and I'd listen out for their treatment stories, like, you know, how was it? And if it went really well, I'd think, oh, maybe. And if it went badly, I'd oh, no way. And in the end, I decided that, you know, damn it, I would do treatment. That the 6 months of possible hideous side effects would possibly give me the chance of feeling better for the rest of my life. So I did. And at that time, I was really involved with obviously with hepatitis C. That was, you know, I knew a lot of people with hepatitis C. I'd had some very negative experiences with medical professionals. And I'd heard a lot of people's really bad experience with medical professionals. So I was trying to like advocate for people with hepatitis C. I was accompanying friends to see their doctors, things like that. So in that way it was sort of harm reduction in a sense, but I still didn't think about myself in terms of working in harm reduction. I don't know, you know, it seemed to be almost to be an academic term really. But I guess, you know, I was an academic, but then I've always had that strange disjunction between being a so-called academic and being a user. Anyway, so I did treatment and it was successful. And then this job came up in London, working at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine with Tim Rhodes, whose work I really admired, doing a project interviewing people who inject drugs about their hepatitis C preventative practices. And I didn't think I'd get the job. There was no way I thought I'd get the job, but I applied. And I was really lucky I got it. And so then I sort of felt like it came full circle. And that when I was doing work with hepatitis C, it was mainly people who'd stopped injecting. But since I've been in London, I've been interviewing people who are currently injecting, and it's been a really wonderful experience. And they can often guess that I'm an ex-user. They might see my track marks, or it might be something I say, you know, and I never hide it from them. And, you know, we'll have sessions where they're showing me, you know, all their abscesses and their veins, and they're wanting to look at my track marks, and you know, and so we talk a lot about that stuff, and some amazing stuff comes up about, you know, what they're doing in their lives and what's important to them. And I think that that's what's been great about this work, is that it's been so informed by what is important to people who are currently using. You know, what does harm reduction mean to people on the street? How can harm reduction help people who are out there, you know, and how can it be relevant and meaningful? So, you know, it's been a real privilege. And the other day, I'll just end on this, I was giving a presentation to a group of service users, and there are about 60 of them. And a lot of them were homeless. really marginalised. And I started off by doing a little bit of a personal story, a bit like this. And I got to the point where I was doing my master's research, and I just said, as by the by, and I got my master's degree, and everyone clapped. The whole room spontaneously clapped, and it was so moving, and I thought, wow, gosh, they haven't even, here I'm actually a doctor. I said, I'm a doctor, unfortunately I'm not the right kind. I can't write prescriptions, but, it is pretty amazing when I think about my past and where I've come from. And in a way, doing this work helps me to marry up those two parts of my life. Back when I was using, I had about a decade where I didn't have any of what is socially ascribed value. I wasn't making a family, I didn't have a job, I wasn't doing any educational, anything. I was dedicated, using drugs, that's it. Getting in trouble with the police, living on that side. And in a way, while it could be seen as a wasted decade, it's given me an insight into a part of life that a lot of people don't see. And it's given me an ability to really connect and empathise with the people that I'm working with now. And also, I'm not completely discarding that part of my life because I'm honouring it and doing what I'm doing now. So, it's been a really wonderful journey, and I'm very pleased to have made it this far. Thanks.